Christian, wonderful to meet you, sir. Thank you so much for taking a minute out for the program today. I appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here. Excited. Thank you.
Me too, you bet. So before we get into your world of words, I want to begin with what I always start with. I've been wanting to put this question away, but it's just too prevalent. 6 years ago, this pandemic changed all of our lives, the fabric of how we lived. How did you get through the pandemic era, and how has it changed the way that you live and work in 2026?
That's a really good question. It unfortunately was not the greatest of experiences for me, like many people, I think. But I was in a career job at Marriott International, and as soon as travel stopped, they started to slice off parts of their organization, and I was one of the casualties. And so it totally it took me from knowing exactly where I thought I was going to be in 5, 10 years to, oh, this is, I'm going to have to rethink this entirely. And so I share that just because um, the I think it's a dramatic example of a lot of the type of change a lot of people went through. And I think it's taken me till now, after the lockdown ended, to really process all that changed in my life from that moment in time when we started to get the emails of like everything's closed, everything's different, and so uh, I could probably do a whole podcast just on
Yeah.
that.
Well, and I think that's the way society is too. I think we all kind of pulled back and went back to lives after the restrictions were lifted, but there was so much that was done to all of us as humans that it's going to take decades. Even what we're living through right now in our world right now, I think for future generations, it's going to take them a long, long time. We're going to fill up many, many books with analyzing and studying what the intersections of this reality is that we're living in now.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I think part of that is because, human nature, like people like me at least, I was always trying to be optimistic about it and see the good side. It's like, oh, at least we get to spend more time with family, and at least like I started my career at AARP after Marriott, and it's been very good. So it's like not everything that happened was a negative, but I didn't stop to really accept and process how bad some of the negative things were, until I think years later, it sort of just added up. And I'm not one to usually bottle things up, so it took me some real like introspection to understand just how much I was impacted by that.
So before we get into Starling, I want to know this. If I put you in front of a bunch of kids in a school, they're 12 years old and it's career day, you walk into the room and the kids want you to synthesize what you do for a living on a daily basis. How do you explain what you do as an occupation vocation?
That's a good question. And I've always referred to myself as a creative professional. So um, some people prefer the term storyteller because it's less commercial. I do talk about myself as a storyteller, and I've worked in a lot of different media over the years and worked in on films and worked on video games and worked in, comic books, and advertising obviously has been the majority of my commercial career. But I use the term creative professional because um, the there is an audience. There's always an audience, at least for my particular work, and I do see them as um, consumers, and not in an ugly word kind of way, but like I'm creating a product for them to enjoy, and so the the output of my work is a product that they consume. And so I prefer that term creative professional because I create art for my own benefit and my own enjoyment sometimes too, but I don't consider it part of my professional life.
So, what did you want to be when you were a kid? When you were 12, 13 years old, what was your dream gig?
I wanted to be an artist, and that meant different things at different times. And so I guess I've succeeded at that, but mostly visual art when I was, real little. And when my parents got me drawing classes as sort of an extracurricular, we didn't have a lot of money growing up. I was in a kind of an inner city kid, poor, and my but my parents, when I had an interest, they would really bend over backwards to try to figure out a way to help me develop that because like they didn't know anything about art. And they got me some drawing lessons, I think when I was like 10 or 11. And that it was just it's so neat to be able to see something. And you talk about kids, I think like in order to be able to have a goal that's tangible that you want to achieve, and to think that it's actually possible, you have to be able to see someone else has made that possible. So, like, once you've been in a room and you've seen people who make, a living with their art, then it just awakens that part of your brain that, like, and gives you more drive, I think, to achieve that as a goal for yourself. So,
So, who were some writers or artists growing up that left an indelible impression on you, whether consciously or subconsciously, that's manifested into the way that you create?
absolutely, that's an easy one because my favorite, I love reading. I love art and media in general, but I think the book that left the biggest impression on me was actually Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, which I read cover to cover, the English translation, but unabridged, when I was 14. That was my became my favorite novel as I was determined to get through the whole thing. And that was really the point where I crossed into this I don't know, it changed the way I read because I was able to get, I think it was an achievement for me, but it also got me thinking about how literature can really inform our lives and the way we see things. I grew up in a religious family, and um, I don't resent that at all, but I have moved away from religion. And one of the things that always struck me was how people could get up in church and say, like, I know this and I know that, and they're very certain about things. And reading Victor Hugo, it taught me about the dangers of absolutism and how you, the more you know, you think you know something, the more dangerous that could be, actually. I feel a lot more comfortable admitting to myself when I don't know something. And we've seen how that can sort of get us into trouble on a large scale when a lot of people say, well, I know what this candidate's going to do, or I know what this company's going to do, or, I know what's going to happen if XYZ. And when it turns out that you don't know, or the rug gets pulled out from under you, or, something that you believe in, you start to doubt, it can really be devastating in terms of its impact on your life instead of, and I try to keep a more open perspective where it's like I may not know, and then it helps me navigate when things don't go according to plan, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally does. So give me kind of an overview of your professional timeline. You've mentioned just in this very short spans really interesting gigs that you've had. Kind of talk to me about your evolution professionally up to this point.
Sure. I developed an interest in computers, and I was this was the 90s, late 90s, and the personal computers just becoming, a household object. And um, a lot of my friends were into gaming and stuff, and I was sort of into that, but I was really into creating, and so I was trying to make my own games and things. And I so then I got into graphic design because I was always into visual arts. And my parents, again, just like they did with their drawing class, they found me someone to sort of do a little internship, a practicum with. She was the head of graphic design for the state of Pennsylvania, and I actually did an internship when I was a teenager with the Commonwealth office there and learned about graphic design from a professional standpoint. And so over the years, I think I fluctuated about what I wanted to do professionally, but eventually I did change majors to graphic design, and I studied, uh, and I sort of stuck with that. I'm kind of all over the place, you know. I have that creative mind, and I like I like to do lots of different things, and so that was a big deal for me. But I will say that I made the decision to stick with graphic design as a career uh, at a Barnes and Noble when I was reading a book about graphic design. You know, so books have always been a major part of my life. I met my wife when we were both working at a bookstore, so it's I minored in English, so and writing.
When I was in my early 20s, I got a job at a Barnes and Noble, and I tried to hatch a way whenever I put books on the shelf to see if I could speed read and get a synopsis while I was doing it so I could go to sections that I was really into. And I remember Alan Lightman was one of my favorites, and really delving into his works and kind of Stephen Hawking and that level of like outer space and theoretical, physics. And anyway, it was fun. And it ended up not working out. It was a little bit of an aggressive job. And I remember before I left, I bought the entire collective works of William Shakespeare before I left with
Oh,
my employee
nice.
discount. So it all worked out, So,
That's amazing. Yeah,
yeah.
when I worked at Borders, may they rest in peace,
Yeah.
and I worked there during the Harry Potter. I think when the
Oh,
last book came out, and so that was nuts. You know, people today don't understand back in the days of a print release, like what that was like,
yeah.
standing in line and like all the people coming in, and that was nuts.
That's probably one of the coolest things in my modern Gen X history that I remember seeing. Because I wasn't a big Harry Potter fan, but I remember when one of the books came out, CNN like pulled back, and I'm like, "Is there a parade on today? What's going on there?" And it was literally on Fifth Avenue in New York. There was a line that went for miles, you
Yeah,
know, for people to
exactly.
get it. So it's cool. I mean, we may get that with the iPhone now, but there's not the sexy glam, the old school pulp like real good heart and soul that you get for waiting for a book.
Yeah, it's always a little different. And with different comes new things that aren't necessarily better or worse. It's just you still kind of mourn those experiences disappearing, you know, because
Yeah.
nobody's ever going to line up for a hardcover again.
No. So I'm curious, having that fascination and love for literature and creating, what was that feeling, that adrenaline rush the first time you got that box of books that had your creation and your name on the front of it?
It was really cool, you know, but I disappoint people sometimes about like I wasn't exactly I know a lot of writers who it's like this is their dream come true, and you know I hate to like burst people's bubble about that with my um, because I've been an artist for so long, and because I have my career in advertising. I don't want to say that it jaded me, but I'm a lot more of a realist when it comes to these kinds of things, and like putting your work out there over and over again, and like millions of people seeing it and then forgetting about it the next day. Like even if it was their favorite thing in the world, it you know it kind of framed it in a little different way. So I was a lot less scared of putting my work out there than most, I think, new writers, where I was just like, I'm just going to do it. I've been sitting on these ideas for like 20 years. I'm going to write this book and I'm going to publish it. And, you know, I have some friends in the publishing industry and some contacts. I chose to do this to self-published because this was my personal art. This is something I was creating, you know, I didn't want another boss. You know, I've had a good, successful career. I didn't need that. And so then, anyway, I've had all these ideas that I want to publish, and I was like, I'm just going to get going. I'm just going to start doing this. And now, of course, the book became popular. People liked it, and so I was like, I guess I should get this thing edited. And so I've actually now I work with a small publisher in Pittsburgh called Outpost Books, and they're great. They, you know, it's a small sci-fi imprint, but they provide me with some support, like editing and things like that. And but but now it's more real. And now when I do get a box of books, or if I do a book signing or something, now I get that little like little kid inside me who, gets excited and realizes, oh, I'm actually doing this. I actually have an audience. That's the coolest thing to me. It's like the box of books is neat, but having an audience that enjoys your work, that's really meaningful to me.
For sure. So let me ask you this. Who has been that inspirational force, that hero in your personal life that's allowed you to evolve to where you're at now?
I think, heroes are interesting. You have different types of, for me personally, I respect people, in different ways. I think there are always going to be people who are influential in your life personally, and then there are the sort of the great artists that you look up to. Um, I read a book recently about REM. It's on the shelf here, actually, the band REM.
Yeah.
And one of my artistic heroes has always been Michael Stipe. Um, and I think a lot of people don't know a lot about him or about that band was such a fixture for such a long time, but I think they didn't have as much drama behind the scenes as a lot of other bands, and so people may not know as much of the history. But Michael Stipe is very, I think, is a very creative, courageous creator who was open about his sexuality earlier on than a lot of people were, who was um, always stood up for good causes, like and used the music to support causes like that. And also, he was a visual artist, is a visual artist, and uh, I don't know, he just has always spoken to me for some reason. In my personal life, though, I have to do a mention and a shout out to my graphic design teacher at Harrisburg Area Community College, who Marjana Talebi, who is the director of the program there and has been for 50, 30 years, I don't know, plus. And she has changed so many people's lives. So many of her students have gone on to be creative directors in New York and other major cities, and or like me to get to a leadership level. And she changed my perspective of like how I could see myself leading a team in a sort of a legitimate, you know, uh, professional environment instead of like the scatterbrained artist that I've always been. So,
Yeah. So let me ask you this. If you could meet one person alive on the planet right now that you find inspirational, that's inspired you, or that you just find fascinating, and you could spend some time with them, have a lunch that might help you on your journey, who would you love to meet and talk to?
wow, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I think I mean, I already mentioned Michael Stipe. I'd love to meet Michael Stipe. I lost the opportunity to see REM in concert, so that'll never happen because I doubt a reunion is coming anytime.
Yeah.
Uh, but I don't know. That's a good. I've never thought of that before, to be honest, because I I try not to put people on pedestals. I think that we have like too much of that in this world. We
Yeah.
are all just people. I'm a humanist. I believe that when you see somebody, you should, I identify them as a human first, not the things that you put them on a pedestal for, and not the things that you might hate about them, but like human first. And then once you get to know them or more about them, then you can hate them if you want. But but let's start with that baseline of respect as human beings. And so it kind of like pulls the rug out from under, that concept of like hero worship. There's a lot of people that I would love to just pick their brains, though. People who have been like Brandon Sanderson. I'd love to have lunch with Brandon Sanderson and just talk to him about that journey of like, when he first started those Kickstarters and when he was writing and had a small audience versus now being like, a superstar and where millions of people will buy anything that he releases. It's like I would love to just pick his brain about the contrast of like today you're thinking about, well, should I go Netflix or should I go Apple TV? And back when you were like working a day job and writing in the basement, and it's like I just would love to know the how that has changed his perspective, or he's not the only one. You know, people like that. I do. I'm curious about that.
So let me ask you a question. Growing up in the spiritual world that you were in and being in a different place right now, how much of that has fueled the way that you write and create and transmute that into a fictional narrative? How much of those worlds come together to whether it creates a narrative that's enticing or a cathartic backbone to what you do as a creator? How does that work for you?
I think it informs it in a lot of different ways. I think one of the things that I will mention is that I don't like get up every day and think about not being a Mormon anymore because I grew up in the Mormon church. But like, I, d- I don't even think about it most of the time. I think some people make that their entire identity. It's like, I didn't leave religion as part of my identity and then turn into like make anti-religion part of my identity. That's not it at all. And so I will say that, but I do think it informs like my perspective, especially kind of feeling like an outsider growing up and just having that perspective of looking from the outside in, which I think is a cool place to be in sometimes, especially as an artist, because it's like you are seeing things differently and you're seeing things for what they are, right? Instead of, romanticizing them. But I think it can also be a very lonely place because you are isolated. When you're true to yourself, it can be a very isolating experience because you are not necessarily by being off of what people put their expectations on you. They come in with a certain set of expectations and what they think you should be, and if you're being true to yourself, you might isolate yourself to some extent. So that I mentioned because the first book, Lily Starling and the Voyage of the Salamander, the themes of that book are very much about personal identity and connection, and the idea that we can be very lonely, we can be alone, but we can get through that if we are true to ourselves, if we are true to who we are inside, that connection will come eventually. And so it's about found family, to use like a modern phrasing, but like it's about, I think literally finding out who you are and your identity. And then the sequel, Lily Starling and the Storm Riders, actually it talks a lot about cults, and it talks a lot about this idea of being radicalized and being a, a follower. And so I did bring a lot of that into my writing as well. In fact, the next book, which comes out in April, talks even more about, I think, this concept of immortality and the idea that people want to live forever, or they want a fountain of youth or something like that, and the idea of that being kind of a immoral. I don't know if immoral is the right word. Immortality is not a pure, not a good thing.
Yeah, totally get it. So let me ask you this. When you think about the word retirement, when the big words flash up in your head, what do you think about? What's your idea of retirement?
It's a very good question. I do creative direction and run the creative team over at AARP, and I do have to say that my views do not represent the views of AARP, but I do want to say that it's a really important thing to think about the people who are traditional retirement age and this idea of ageism, and looking at having a robust life in the second half of your life, where I think we have such an obsession of youth, which is also a theme that I've been writing about, this idea of just that is something to strive for, is to stay young forever. And where really I just think about, I don't think about retirement personally, and it's not like in a negative way, not like, oh, I could never retire. It's more just like I think about my life in terms of the activities and the what I want to create and what I want to put out there into the world, and sort of terms of um, leaving a mark, but leaving a connection, and more than a mark. It's not so much legacy as it is just uh, what I leave behind is what I want to leave behind is my connection with other people, and maybe some people being better off from connecting with my work and that kind of thing. So I don't know. I don't really think about retirement.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. If you had a dream tonight, ran into the 16-year-old version of you, and you walked into the room and you had a huge coffee table book in your hands and you handed it over and said, "This is how your life has worked out so far." Would that young version of you believe it?
I think so. You know, I had a funny experience about that the other day. I was doing a recording for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, and it was with my siblings. So my brother and my sister, and we were doing it like a Zoom call like this, and we were recording it and giving sort of, we did some readings, and it was really a special moment. And I took a screenshot of the three of us together, and I shared it with them, and I was like, it may sound crazy, but this looks exactly the way that if I were to go back in time and show this to young me, I would be like, yep, that's us as adults, because I feel like our personalities have just like continued on so much into our adulthood. And I have to give my parents so much credit for that. I think that it was Agatha Christie who said, if you have a happy childhood is one of the greatest gifts that you could ever receive. And I really relate to that because that was such a, it's really neat. Not a lot of people, I think, can have a moment like that where you're still close with your siblings, you're still close with your parents, and you can all, especially through all the crap that we've been through as a country and all the negativity around politics and things like that, especially coming from like a religious family and having all moved in different directions. I just think that it's such a gift
Yeah.
that we can still share a moment like that. But it did make me think about like young me,
Yeah.
seeing myself now. I think he'd be like, yeah, that tracks. That tracks. Even
Yeah.
with some of the hard things I've had to go through, you know, I think me being a realist, it's like, yeah, I can see that.
So let me ask you this, Christian. Everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, everyone you work with, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
If I had to talk about myself in terms of boiling it down, I would uh, hope that the word empathy would come up because you know I think that I connect to people um, in that way, and I try to understand people. I really try not to dismiss people, um, you know, without giving them the benefit of the doubt. And so that's really how I think of myself is like that. I use the word humanist because that's something, it's like a shorthand that people understand to some extent. Um, I don't like to put any sort of like ism or, you know, I didn't join humanism, so to
Yeah.
speak. But like I use that term because I think it is a good descriptor of like um, who I am as a person and how I connect to people.
So if anybody wants to get into the Lily Starling world, delve into more of what you're doing, you're publishing, all of the good work, where's the best place to go?
You can find me on Instagram. That's where I'm the most active at C. Hurst Publishing. If you go to lilystarlingbook.com, you can find me, you know, there, or just put my name in Google.
All right. And I will put all of these links in the show notes. Christian, thank you, sir. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful new year. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
You bet.